Hello, and welcome to our Women and Blended Families. This is our March conversation. If you haven't joined us before, we are always live the second Tuesday of the month at 3 p.m. Central on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and we have a different guest each month. My name is Gayla Grace, and I am so thrilled to have you joining us. Today, the focus of our conversation is on the subject of grief. I mean, ladies, we've all experienced grief of different kinds and varying degrees. My dad passed away just 2 months ago, and I'm still grieving that huge loss in my life. And as many of you, I've experienced the grief that divorce brings, and possibly when a marriage is shattered, that there's a lot of grief that happens as a result of that. Some of you might be navigating grief from losing a spouse, and perhaps you're helping your kids who've lost a parent. We have a wonderful guest who's joining us today, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Before we get started, though, I'd like to know who is with me. I love to see the ladies who join me live. So if you're on here with us, give us your name and where you're from in the conversation. And just let me know where you are from, where you're hearing from. And also, I'm curious. Do you have a spring break trip planned? I mean, this is the time for spring break trips, right? I don't know when your kids are out of school, but maybe you're doing something fun. And if you are, let me know about it. Just tell me where you're going, or maybe you're doing a staycation. You know what that is, right? It's where you stay home and you try to plan fun things that the kids would enjoy around the house. We all did those during COVID, right? But sometimes we do those other times of the year too. Also, be sure that you tag a friend who you know would benefit from our conversation. Even if they can't join us live, they can also watch the recorded version later. And then when we get started with our conversation, feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll answer as many of those as we can. We would love to help you with your questions that you might have as we get started on our conversation that centers around grief. So I'm looking for some comments, trying to know if some of you ladies have joined me and told me where you're from and told me if you're having a trip planned. Let me tell you about a trip I have planned. I actually am leaving the country in a couple of weeks for the birth of our first grandbaby. I know it's a pretty big deal. And if you come back in April, maybe I'll have some pictures to show you of that little one. It is a baby girl. We know that. And so I am excited to be doing a little trip, not really a spring break trip. It's a big trip, actually. So I see people that are on from Dallas and currently headed to Orlando to pick up her bonus daughter for a Disney trip. That sounds like fun. Sounds like fun. All right. Well, I want to bring on our guest, Sabrina McDonald. She is wife to her husband, Robbie, a mom to two, and a stepmom to two. Her blended family was formed after she was widowed following a tragic accident where her husband was killed. And Sabrina has been writing on marriage, parenting, grief, and spiritual growth for 20 years. She has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and she is the author of 6 books. Her most recent one titled, A Home Built from Loss and Love, Coming Together as a Blended Family. Here's a copy of that book. It's a great one for you ladies. So Sabrina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to
Well,
be here.
we're so glad to have you join us. I'm curious, do you have a spring break trip planned with your kids?
Maybe a little one. So we may be going to Silver Dollar City in Branson,
Oh,
and they
yes.
really love to go there, but it'll just be a
Yeah.
day trip for them and a couple of friends, but they'll have a good time.
Yeah. It's always fun to go to Branson. We've done that, done Silver Dollar City. That's a great place to go spend
Mhm.
some time. And the kids love all those rides. I don't necessarily love those rides.
Me too. But that's why I love Silver Dollar City because it has some other things besides just rides. So,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Well, so I see some ladies. Patricia from Sycamore, Illinois. Welcome. Laura from Denver, marrying on Easter and blending 7 children. Oh, God bless you, Laura. Come back and join us. You'll want to hear some more of our conversations as you blend 7 kids. And I see, I believe it's Josette watching from St. Vincent, Stacy watching from Salem, Oregon. No spring break plans for us. The kids are grown and doing their own thing. Yep, I get that, Stacy. Totally understand that. Well, thank you, ladies. We're excited to have you join. And I know there'll be many others that are out there. But Sabrina, I am curious if you will give us some background. Let's talk a little bit about your family. You and your husband, Robbie, were both widowed when you came
Mhm.
together. So give us some background on your family.
Sure. When Robbie and I got married, so my first husband was killed in a car accident, like you said, and my children were 3 months old and 2 years old when that
So
happened.
small, wow.
Tiny. So my son claims to have a memory of his father. I don't know if he really does or not.
Huh.
And my daughter obviously has zero, none.
Yeah, right.
And then I was a single mom for 3 years before I met Robbie. And then he was a single dad for 2 years. His wife died of cancer, and it was very, very sudden.
Hmm.
So they discovered it, and then within 2 or 3 months, she died. So it was
Wow.
really a shocking, yeah, it was more like a sudden death. And he had a 12-year-old and a 22-year-old when that happened. So there
Wow.
are 20 years difference between the oldest and the youngest. So
That's
when
a
we got
lot.
married, yeah, when we got married, my children were 3 and 5 and his were 14 and 24. So it was a big difference.
Right. And I'm assuming was the 24-year-old out of the house?
Yes, he was already out of the house and he got married just a couple months before we did. So he
Okay.
was a newlywed, and then of course the 14-year-old lived with us. So it was the 5 of us in the house together.
Right. Okay. All right. So when your family's blended, I'm sure you expected that grieving would be part of the journey, right? I'm curious, how did that grieving show up? What do you remember the most about how grief showed up, and what tips would you give in helping our listeners navigate it?
Well, the grief showed up in obviously in ways that we expected as far as the death is concerned.
Mm.
So, when you're missing someone, and when people are grieving, they don't often realize that it's grief that they're experiencing. So it comes out in other ways. They're not able to say, I'm sad because I miss my mom or my wife. Like in the case of my husband, I knew when I married him that he was going to need help get moving through his grief because he was using dating and
Mm.
romance and things of that nature to help him deal with his
Mhm.
loss. So I knew that when I married him that it would be my job to help him work through his grief.
Right.
And so it would come out in ways that were, anger, frustration, irritation, even with my teenage stepson. With him, it was, you never knew. I didn't know if it was grief or if it was just teenager
Oh,
life,
right. And you
you
hadn't
know?
had teenagers yet, so it was
No,
all new to you. Yeah.
exactly. So I had
Mhm.
no idea. So a lot of it is you're just kind of wading through, you're testing things out. You're going, okay. But the way that I would deal with it is that I would get these guys to talk a lot about if it was my stepson, I'd get him to talk about his mom, and I'd ask him
Mhm.
questions about her and what do you miss, and tell me things that you like. If he didn't want to talk about her, that's fine too. You don't ever force it.
Right.
And my husband, I would do the same thing. And as the second wife, that can be really hard to do sometimes,
Right.
to talk about that first spouse. And even in a divorce situation, in my book, I talk about how you need to understand the first spouse of your current spouse, because that person made your spouse who they are today. And
Mm.
so by understanding their personality and understanding who they were, their likes, their dislikes, their weaknesses and their strengths,
Mhm.
it helps you to understand who you're currently married to, because that person was a part of who your spouse is.
Right.
So to
Right.
understand them is just understand who you're married to. So
Right.
we talked about her a lot. We talked a lot about our losses, and I talked a lot about my losses a lot. A lot of people are amazed by Robbie and me that we talk so freely about our first
Mm.
spouses and how much we love them
Right.
and how
Mhm.
much we miss them.
Mhm.
But we can do that because we did that from the very beginning. It was just kind of like, I'm going to talk about this person. I do love this person. I still love this person. And even though I love you, they're still a part of who I am.
Right.
So, that's part of how you work through that grief, is allowing a safe place in your home
Mhm.
to, number one, have grief,
Yes.
because a lot of homes think they can't be sad.
Right.
They try to get rid of the sadness.
Especially Christian homes, wouldn't you
Yes.
say? Yeah.
Yes. They do that a lot.
Yeah.
Christians, with joy being a fruit of the spirit,
Mhm.
we often dismiss sadness as if
Right.
it's the opposite of joy,
Right.
so because we want to be joy filled, we don't want to be sad.
Right.
But sadness was given to us by the Lord, and
Mhm.
Jesus was called a man of sorrows.
Right.
The Bible says that he was acquainted with grief. So it's not unchristian to have sadness in your heart. What did he do when Lazarus died?
He
It says
cried.
Jesus wept.
Right.
Yeah. Jesus wept. And it said he looked at the others, and when I was going through my own grief, that was very interesting to me, because when I read that passage of scripture, which is in John chapter 11, by the way, if anyone wants to read it. But when I read that passage of scripture, it stood out to me that Jesus knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And he went to the tomb, and all the people that knew Lazarus were there, and they were weeping and they were crying. And I expected, when I read that passage, for Jesus to say something like, "Shame on you, you of little faith. Don't you know that I'm going to raise this man from the dead?" It doesn't say that at all. It says the
Mm-mm.
exact opposite. It says that Jesus was overcome with grief because of the sadness that the people that he saw in the people. So he had empathy for them,
Right.
and he was overcome with his own grief because of their sadness. And so he was feeling the sadness that they felt, and he was moving with them through that grief. And the Bible says to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. So when a person is rejoicing, yay, great, that's wonderful. We want to have
Right.
joy with them. But when they're weeping and they're sad, we also need to be sad with them and
Right.
comfort them in their grief.
Mhm.
So, and that's what the Lord showed us in that John chapter 11 with Lazarus. He was moving with these people in their grief, even though he knew that he was about to perform a miracle and bring him back from the dead.
Right.
So, it's a godly thing to do that. So I think that's the two things. We need to leave space in our home for grief.
Right.
And also, just in practical terms, allow the people in your home to talk about the people that hurt them, that they miss, the things that they're sad about. We should leave space in our homes for that kind of conversation.
Right. And one of the things I think you write in your book is don't take your children's grief away. And I think that's part of what you're saying right now, right there. But what else? How else would you expound on that when you say that?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's actually a book that I read. It's an old book. It's from, I think it was published in the 70s, and it was called Don't Take My Grief Away.
Hmm.
And I remember when I first read that book, how profound that was to me. And so
Mm.
I'm reading this book as a widowed woman, as a single mom. I wasn't remarried yet. And I thought that is exactly how it feels, because when you are in such sorrow, really all you want is for people to feel your pain with you. And all they want to do is make you feel better.
Right. They want you to be okay.
Yes, yes. They want you to feel better. They want to make sure that you're all right, that they
Mhm.
have comforted you. And when they do that, they want to, they want to see a result of that. So they want you to stop crying or not being sad anymore, or go, oh
Right.
yeah, thank you. That really comforted me.
Right.
It's from the heart. Their heart is in the right place. But what we don't realize is that we're trying to take away from them. I remember thinking, my first husband, whose name was David, I thought, he is such a good person. I don't want people to forget him.
Mm.
If I stop grieving, then that means that he doesn't matter anymore.
Oh,
If I
wow.
stop being sad about it,
Mm-hmm.
and which wasn't true. I mean, obviously he still matters. And I found that out later. I found out, oh, if I'm happy and I move on in life, he does still matter to me. He still matters to everybody. That
Right.
I didn't,
Right.
I felt like if I stopped grieving him, that somehow it lost, that I was losing that, I guess, the strength of how much I loved him,
Oh,
which wasn't true, but that's how I perceived it at the time.
right.
And I think the same thing happens in blended families. When a child is removed from a parent, whether that's from divorce or death, they feel that loss. And
Mhm.
when you start saying things like, it's okay, you'll have friends, you'll enjoy living in this new neighborhood, you'll love your new siblings,
Right.
you'll love this, you'll love that. You're trying to talk them into all the wonderful things, it'll be okay. You'll still see your dad. You'll still, all of those kinds of things that we say to
Mm-hmm.
comfort them
Right.
is really taking their grief away.
Right.
We're really, and to them, they're thinking, no, I love my dad. I
Mm-hmm.
love the home we lived in. I don't want new siblings.
Right.
These are all the things that they are scared of. They're afraid. They're not sure, that they know that you're saying that just to make them feel better about the situation. And
Right.
I think a better way to handle that is just to sit down and let them air their fears. And sometimes they don't even know what they're afraid of. And
Right.
we have to walk them through that. Say, are you afraid that you'll never get to see your dad again? Are you
Mm.
afraid that I'll try to replace him with this new man in my life?
Right.
Or, those kinds of things that maybe we need to ask a few questions and find
Mm-hmm.
out what their fears are,
Mm-hmm.
that they're really struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual that kids they need our help to identify their feelings at times. They
Mhm.
can't always put words on it. And so sometimes as we talk around it and talk with
Mhm.
them, then they can begin to kind of identify what those feelings are, which is helpful.
Right.
One of our viewers, and I might also say, please feel free to put questions in the chat as we talk. Would be happy to answer questions on this subject. But Stacy said, my husband has 4 daughters. As a guy, he wasn't always able to see their emotions. Their mom had strict rules about what could not be discussed at our house. And I had to grieve the lack of healing in our home, and I had limited ability to impact that. That's hard.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Hmm.
I mean, she's saying that that the biological mom is limiting the things that they could say in their house as a
Well,
step
she's
family. Is that right?
she's just saying my husband has 4 daughters, and as a guy, he wasn't able to see their emotions, and their biological mom had strict rules about what could not be discussed at
Yeah.
our house. So she
Right.
as the stepmom. Yeah.
At the stepmom's house.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's where it gets real tricky.
Mhm.
That's just where it gets real tricky. Oh, you may have more to say about that than I do
Well,
there.
I just think that it's not unusual that we have grief in categories that we're not prepared for. And
Right.
this is one right here.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's a matter of it's gonna catch us off guard. And
Hmm.
honestly, I guess for me, some of my grief, I journal, and sometimes I just journal my feelings because
Hmm.
trying to talk to people, they don't get it. I get more disappointment, and in journaling, then I can pray, and I can also get answers from God as
Yeah.
I'm trying to deal with certain situations. Because, the truth is, whether it's divorce or death and forming a blended family, there is grief. There's grief around a dream that didn't come true. There
That's right.
might be a grief around a white picket fence that you thought was going to go up in remarriage because you
Hmm.
had um, such expectations about what this second marriage was going to look like, and then there were challenges, and so
Right.
there's grief with that
Hmm.
happens. I'm sure some of that even happened in remarriage after death, that
Oh
you
yeah.
are excited about a
Hmm.
new marriage on one hand and didn't anticipate some of just the dynamics that happened in your remarriage. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Oh yes, definitely. Well, and in the case of of this mom who's she feels like that they can't speak and they can't talk to her, I would say that she can still have a really, she can reach and attempt to have a good relationship with these girls,
Right.
and not make them feel like they have to do something that would jeopardize their loyalty to their mom. You
Mhm.
know, you can still have a relationship with them. I think a lot of times stepmoms feel like, we have to be this mom figure. You really don't have to be the mom figure. They have a
Right.
mom, they're
Right.
close to their mom. You be somebody else. You be kind of like an aunt or a teacher or a
Mhm.
mentor. And you don't have to put them in a position where they have to say, they might say something that their mom won't like. So
Mhm.
just leave room. Say, I'm here to talk to you about whatever it is you want to talk about. If you don't think your mom would like that, that's fine too. You don't have to. You
Mhm.
just talk about me, whatever you think you're allowed to talk about. Start with that little bitty seed
Yes.
and let it grow from there. We don't have to have all of their love and all of their loyalty right up front at the beginning. And honestly, there's going to be some kids that will never give you all their love and all their loyalty.
Oh, exactly. Right.
Yeah,
But just capitalize on what you have and
right.
continue to do your part to grow relationships. Another
Right.
thing I want to talk about, because I think this is pretty common in the case of when a child has lost a parent, and then as they grow older, and let's say that for you, your kids were young, and then when
Hmm.
they have milestones and they move into different stages of life, grief can show up in different
Yes.
ways.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes we don't anticipate that. We feel like, oh, we've kind of worked through the grief at this stage. And then all of a sudden you start seeing some behavior that catches you off guard. And sometimes
Hmm.
that's grief.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what would you say? How have you seen that play out in your family?
Oh, definitely. Well, I mean, how it's played out in my family, I think for me as a mom of young children, I mean, I was just talking to my husband about this just yesterday or the day before, telling him how it was a moment of grief. So we've been married 10 years.
Hmm.
And it just suddenly, I was watching or listening to something, I can't remember what it was, but anyway, whatever it was a family, a biological family. And this dad, he was talking about his little family growing up and, talking about his wife and their little biological little home. And
Hmm.
I looked at my husband, I said, I have never had the experience of raising my kids in a biological home. I'm like, you did it for 22 years, but
Right.
I did it for 2 years,
Yeah.
so, like, they were babies, and that was just a grief moment for me, where I
Wow.
went, "I lost all of that. I
Right.
never had that, look at that. He looks like you. He looks like," I mean, I kinda did it the first 2 years, but I didn't get the experience of raising these children, and
Right.
having this experiences where he feels about them the way that I feel about them, seeing his own flesh and blood. So, it was just a grief moment for me, and then, the first time my husband took my daughter to a daddy-daughter dance, I thought,
Oh,
"David's not here to see that."
right.
And then, for us, I do more of the grieving for my kids than they do.
Hmm.
But even my husband, when he had his first grandbaby, his wife was not here to see the birth of the grandbaby.
Right.
And it was just a horrible moment of grief for him going,
Mm-hmm.
"She's not here." And the realization that his life would have been so totally different. He would be in empty nest stage right now, and
Right.
going, I wouldn't have young kids. I would be traveling. I'd be going places and doing things and going to see the grandbaby whenever I want to,
Right.
so those moments, they just creep up. And as
Mhm.
as my kids get older, they'll creep up again. Wedding
Yep.
days and my first grandchild and all
Yes.
of those things,
Right.
they'll just keep appearing as you go along. But
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that you recognize it. Like in that scenario that happened with that biological family, you were able to see this is grief. I mean, you have
mhm.
feelings well up inside of you that catch you off
Yes.
guard, but then you realize, oh, this is grief. I
Yeah,
yearn for this. I didn't get to experience it. And that's one of the biggest things about grief is for us to just be aware this is what it is. Okay, now how do I deal with these feelings?
that's
That's
right.
mhm.
There's a loss there, and
Right.
that's all it is. It's a recognition of loss. And,
Right.
I think as blended families, we think sometimes that we have it worse than everybody else, but reality is this happens in every family. You have prodigal children in biological
Yes.
families. You have situations where kids are doing crazy stuff, that you don't agree with or you think is wrong or you think they're going down the wrong path. So, as much as it happens to us, it happens to everyone.
Mm.
And but it just in blended families sometimes the blended family itself creates the loss. And I
Yes.
think that's where we're really caught off guard.
There's loss from the beginning. A blended
Yes.
family is created as a result of loss. And
Yes.
so when you come into this remarriage, everybody is dealing with some kind of a loss that they're
Right.
having to cope with. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I
exactly
mean,
right.
that's the other thing we've got to remember. So here's a question from our viewers. Are there any specific practices that you recommend for honoring the grief and loss of loved ones while still trying to blend a new family?
Okay. This is a really important thing. And I'm glad whoever that was brought that up, because I have seen situations where a, a well-meaning stepmom, we'll just say stepmom since we're talking to moms, has wanted to honor the deceased mom. And by doing so, even though she had good intentions, she really stepped on the toes of the family
Mm,
and hurt their feelings. So, in other words, they didn't feel like she had the right to put herself in a position to honor the mother. It was
okay.
almost like they felt like she was coming in on their territory,
Wow.
sort of desecrating the grave kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And so you have to be real careful. So, what I always tell people is encourage it. Say, hey, you know what? The anniversary of her death is coming up. Would y'all want to do anything to honor your mother on the day of her death? And if they say, yeah, that's a really good idea, we should do that, then go, okay, how can I help you make that happen? Do I need to put something on the calendar? Can I budget some money on the side for you? Whatever you need to do to be the one that enables it to happen, but don't
Right.
be the one yourself to go out. I mean, this person even went out to the grave, and like the
Oh,
family didn't even want to do anything. They were like, "No, I don't really want to." She went out and did it herself. And I felt like that, as a person who's lost someone, I thought that was really presumptuous of her to do that, and they were offended by it.
yeah.
So,
Mm,
that's why I say if you want to encourage them to do something, then let them know it's allowed. Like, let
mm,
them know you're not offended by it. It's
mhm.
totally fine in my home if you want to talk about the person. Another thing we did was that I made a wall in my home where the kids walk by that wall. It's like on the way to their bedrooms. And so I put pictures of Robbie's first wife, and there's pictures of her and their family together. And then even for my children, even though they didn't really know their dad, I
Right.
want them to know that he loved them and that
Yes.
that they were important to him. So
Mhm,
there's pictures of him on that same wall. So everyone, as they're walking past there, they can see their biological parent, that they were loved, that
mhm,
they were cherished, and that they have a place in our home.
mhm.
So there's little things you can do like that, but I would caution, be very careful how you tread that line.
Yeah.
You want them to know that this is a place where you allow the honoring of their parent, but you probably need to be more of a support than an active participant.
Right. So the biological parent really needs to be the one with the biological kids who,
Ye-
if they do end up doing some kind of an activity to honor that person, then the step parent may be the one that needs to step back. But I love what you're saying, that the step parent can be involved trying to orchestrate it or
Right.
bring it up. But I think, as is so common with the step parent role, we got to know our role. We've got to
Right.
step back at times. We are
That's
not
right.
always going to be front and center with these kids. That's just
Hmm.
simply not the place that we need to be. And I would also wonder, Sabrina, if sometimes, say the first anniversary is still too raw. And so maybe kids don't want to, they're not prepared emotionally to deal with anything yet. I think we
Right.
just have to watch the cues of the kids, right? To
Yes, that
see
is so true.
Mhm.
Because everyone grieves differently also.
Right.
So, it's not like a formula where you can just say, well, everybody who's grieving needs to do something to remember their stuff, their deceased parent. You can't say that either, because one child might be like, no, I don't even want to remember my mom. I just want to put
Right.
it out of my head. And
Yeah.
another child is going, I miss her so much. I want to have my whole room collected with,
Mhm.
paraphernalia from my mom.
Right.
So, you really do have to read each child. And that's why I say asking questions, letting them sort of lead those conversations. I would talk to my stepson a lot about his mom and ask him questions about her. If I felt like he was just kind of just giving me one word answers, not
Mhm.
really wanting to talk about it, then we didn't talk about it. I
Right.
just let it go. But by doing that, he knew that he was allowed to
Yes.
talk about his mom and
Mhm.
that she was welcome in our home.
Right.
I wasn't intimidated by her. I wasn't afraid of her, but also I didn't want to take her place.
Yes.
And that's a big deal too. Even though a child's mother or father is deceased, um, they still have a mother or a father.
Right.
You're
Yes.
still not their
Mhm.
mother or father. You can't replace that person.
Right.
So, in their minds, you're not my new mom.
Mhm.
You're the person married to my dad.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's
that's
true,
kind of how they
and
see it.
especially the older the child is, the more
Mhm.
they're just gonna feel like, "Well, you're really just dad's mom." I
Right.
mean, dad's wife. You're really just
Right.
dad's
Right.
wife. You're not they may not even really consider you a stepmom. Now, the longer you're in their life, they might begin to consider you, in that realm, but
Right.
absolutely, and I love what you've touched on, Sabrina, about not feeling threatened by the kids wanting to still have pictures of their
Mhm.
deceased parent on the wall, or just talking about them, bringing up these conversations. And some of that is we can't carry around these fragile emotions that we feel threatened when our kids want to talk about that parent or want to have pictures on the wall. Now, I'm not saying it has to be front and center in the living room where everybody
Right.
looks at them all the time. I mean, right?
Right. Or a wedding photo, yeah,
Yeah.
have to have pictures of their wedding on the wall or something like that. But yeah, just saying this person is a part of our life. They're a part of our family, and
Right.
they're welcome to be so. And I would say that's true for step parents. I mean, for biological parents that are still alive too. I mean, if a child wants to have a
Yes.
picture of their father or their mother, in their room or in their bedroom or in their wallet carried around, there's no reason to feel any kind of twinge of jealousy or pain toward that person. Now, we are humans, and so
Yes.
jealousy is going to be a part of it, especially at first.
Yes.
Because
Mhm.
one of the things I really struggled with was understanding that my husband loved someone besides me, because
Mm.
it wasn't like he was like, well, she was a terrible wife, I'm glad she's gone. I mean, it was, he loved her. They were high school sweethearts, and same for me. I mean, I really loved my first husband. We both had very, very good marriages. And so the thought that he still loved this woman and wished she was still alive, I
Right.
thought it haunted me for a long time. If she was still alive, I wouldn't
Mm.
even be a thought in his
Right.
brain. He'd be
Right.
like, see ya. She came walking back in the door and went, I'm not dead. I was really on an island for 5 years or whatever,
Oh gosh.
They'd be like, bye, honey. I loved you once. Um, but I just have to say that the longer that you're married, just stick in there, hang in there, and you'll find that place. Now, one of the things that my mom told me, like when I was having a baby, my second child, I remember talking to my mom and saying, I love this first child so much that I'm scared that when the second child is born, that I won't love her as much as I loved him. Like
Oh.
how can I love another person like I love this baby? And my mom said to me, she goes, Sabrina, you'll find out that there's always enough room for love in your heart. No matter how many children you have, you will love all of them with all of your heart.
Right.
And when my baby was born, of course, us moms who have more than one kid, we know
Right.
that that's true. We love them
Right.
all. We love them differently. We don't
Mhm.
love them the same, but we love
Mhm.
them differently. And that's true in a blended, in a remarriage also. So
Right.
even though I loved my first husband with all my heart, I love my second husband with all my heart, and I love them differently. I
Right.
love him in a totally different way than I loved my first husband. And there's no comparison. And I
Mhm.
think it's easy to get into the comparison trap and to go, well, he would never have treated me that way, or he didn't do that. And even in a divorce situation, there's some things you liked about your first spouse that you got used to, that you
Mhm.
liked, that you enjoyed, that you found interesting about them, or that you had
Right.
in common. And then you meet this new person and you're like, well, wow, maybe I should have been with them because he never would have done that to me.
Mm.
It's so easy to compare.
Mhm.
You can't do that. You just cut that out, cut the comparison out, say, don't compare. This is a totally different person, and judge that person based on God's word, just like you would do anybody else. This is the standard, is what God says about marriage, what God says about how you should be treated as a wife or husband, and hold them to that standard, not to the standard of the person you were married to before. And that can also work in negative ways too. Go, well, this person did this to me, and you can project that onto the new
Mhm.
marriage.
Yeah.
That also happens. So I would say, don't judge the person to the past, judge the person for who they are according to God's word and not according to who you were married to before.
Right. Yeah. And I think as I listen to you talk about, and you and Robbie both came into this with the similar circumstances because both of you lost a spouse. But I think if
Mhm.
one of the couple comes in and they have not lost a spouse, then they might even need to hear their new spouse talk about, yes, I do still love my spouse, but I love you too. I mean, they
Right.
might even need some extra reassurance,
Mhm.
because I can see how that would feel threatening for somebody who hasn't walked through the death of a spouse. And so they don't understand some of this, where you and Robbie both had similar circumstances and you were able to really
Yes.
understand it.
Definitely.
Mhm.
That is a benefit of having similar experiences.
Mhm.
But for the person who hasn't had that similar experience and is struggling to understand that, or for the person who's been married before and understands very well that you love that person very much, which was my problem, because I was like, I know that you love her
Right.
more than you love me, because I know how I feel about my first spouse too,
Right.
you
Right.
know. But so I understood that. But for anybody who's struggling in that situation, I would just say, find your own niche in their heart. So, for
Mm.
example, my first husband did not like antiques at all. He thought they were dirty, filthy. You know, he didn't want anything used that somebody else had. He was like, it's got their germs on it. I don't like it. Bleh. And I love to go antiquing. I love to go to Goodwill and secondhand shops and things. Well, when I married Robbie, I didn't even know this when we were dating, but he also loves to get to go antiquing and go to flea markets and stuff. So that was something we really found we had in common. And that was a way that I could love him and he could love me, because it was the same
Mm.
thing with his first wife. She didn't care anything about, old stuff or history or the way things were made or any of that. And we
Right.
had that in common. So that was an area where we could really find and grow in love and friendship, where our first marriages, we didn't have that at all. Another way that we've really grown together is we both took a pottery class together.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, that was something that neither one of them cared anything about. So my first husband, his first wife, they weren't really into that kind of stuff. And we took this class together and really found this just that we both loved to do it. It was something we
Wow.
really liked doing together. And we made memories doing new things that we didn't have with our previous spouses.
Oh,
So,
wow.
at the longer you're married, the more time you spend together, just
Mhm.
find those kinds of ways to really connect with your spouse in a new way that you didn't have before, or they didn't. Like if you were never been married before and they have, in that case, just find stuff to do that person didn't
Yeah.
didn't have with their
No, I
previous
love
spouse.
that. Right.
Yeah.
It's a great way to create bonds in this new marriage.
Hmm.
So as we wrap up, I'm curious, for some of those who might be listening and they're in the season of still struggling in step family relationships coming together, I would love for you to just share. I know after being married for 11 years, you've experienced some rewards in your blended family life. And I would just love for you to share something like that that might encourage somebody who is still struggling in their relationships.
Sure. Well, when we first got married, it was really hard on my son, and there was just this. I didn't know if they would ever bond. I really
Mm,
didn't. Even though my son was only 5 years old, my husband was just. He was a military guy, and they just didn't seem like they were ever going to get along.
oh gosh.
Even though Ben was only 5. I mean, I thought, and that was part of my mistake, is that I thought, well, they'll bond easily. I don't have to do anything, to
Right,
make
because
them.
he's young. Right,
Yeah, because
yeah.
he was so little, and
Yeah.
I thought, oh, that will be no problem. And so I kind of encouraged him to be a disciplinarian, which I shouldn't have done. I should have done all the disciplining myself and let them grow together. I didn't, and that was a problem for years.
Mhm.
And now that we've been together as a family for 10 years, um, it's like my son and my daughter both, they see him as their dad. And
Mm.
I remember when my first husband had been, so we were only married 7 years before he died. And on the seventh anniversary of his death, I just thought, this is such an ironic moment for me. Like, he's been
Right.
dead as many
Right.
years as we were married.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my daughter, I think it was, and I was kind of chatting with her about him. And I said, the way he always laughed, or I said something. She goes, well, I've never heard his voice. I don't know what you're talking about. And I thought, well, that's crazy. So we've got to do some videos, So I thought, I'm going to get out some old videos. Robbie was going to be out of town, happened to be out of town on the anniversary of his death. Well, I had the whole family come over, my whole family, everybody, my mom, my dad, my brothers. We're going to watch videos of David. Robbie was not out of town.
Oh, no.
It happened that his trip got canceled and he was there. And I thought, well, how is this going to work? And we started playing the videos, and the kids were like, well, that's kind of interesting. Okay, whatever. And they go off, they're playing with their cousins. They don't care about any of it. I thought, well, this is not working out like I thought. And then there's this image of David on the screen holding my daughter, Catherine, as a baby. And he's holding her and he's singing to her. And I hear her in the back room going, Daddy, Daddy. She comes running in and runs to Robbie's arms and jumps in his arms.
Oh my
And
goodness.
she's laying there in his lap, in his arms, watching her other daddy holding her as a baby. And I thought, we've really come full circle.
Wow.
You know, bonding does happen in a
Yes.
blended family.
Yes.
And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes kids don't want to bond, and that's okay. It's their life. They get to decide if they want to love you or not.
Mhm.
But sometimes it does.
Mhm.
And that was just a really precious moment for me right
Yes.
there.
Mhm.
Because even though it was difficult and it was, there was, it was one of these things. And this is one of the things I write about in my book. You can be happy and sad at the same time.
Yes, right.
And that was one of those moments where
Yeah.
I was happy and sad at the same time.
Mhm.
I was sad for David. He wasn't there, but I was so happy for my daughter that she was loved by both these men.
Mhm.
And it really showed the power of that, of the bonding that can happen within a blended family. So I would just say, stick it out. You know,
Yes.
time does matter. It really does help heal, really
Mhm.
does help grow. And sometimes it takes longer than we want, but
Yeah.
it will get there eventually in many ways.
Right. Oh my goodness, that's a beautiful story and such a great reminder. I mean, the truth is, research says it takes 4 to 7 years for step-family
Mhm.
relationships to come together, whether there's been a death or a divorce or whatever this ending was before the remarriage started. And so time does help as we
Yes.
continue to do our part in growing relationships. Also, we can't just expect it to automatically take place, but we want to continue to do our part. And that's what you have shared with us, Sabrina. There's a
Yeah.
couple of more questions. I'm going to ask one quickly before we wrap up, where Tracy said, how do I handle a daughter that won't talk to me now that I'm engaged? I dated for 6.5 years and he's a good man, but she feels like she's losing me. I try to show her she's not losing me, but now is walking away by not responding to my text messages. I think this can be a common dynamic because during those single parenting years, a child grows very close to that parent that is there, whether there was divorce or death, whatever. But when you live with someone, then that relationship gets very close. So how do I handle a daughter that won't talk to me now that I'm engaged? And there's some fear there, but how would you answer that, Sabrina?
Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, the daughter she's afraid.
Right.
She's mad. But anger is a secondary emotion. There's always something behind anger. And
Mhm.
obviously what's behind this anger is fear and grief. She's
Right.
losing her mom, or she
Mhm.
thinks. And the only thing that you can do in that situation is move forward and let her see that she doesn't lose her mom. I mean,
Yes.
that's what really it's going to take. Yeah,
Right.
that she's just going to have to move through the marriage and then let the daughter find out, oh, I didn't lose my mom. He didn't
Right.
take her from me. And that only comes out again with time and just moving through the situation, still reaching out to her, still telling her you love her, doing your best to be patient. And that's what's really, really tough because, again, we want everything to be good right now. We
Exactly.
want the daughter to be happy right
Mhm.
now. We want her to show up at the wedding, and we want her to show up at the wedding with a smile, right? Like that's what
Yeah.
we want immediately. And sometimes you don't get what you want immediately. It takes time. Again, you're taking her grief away. So
Exactly.
you have to
Mhm.
let her move through the grief and find out on her own that, hey, all the fears that I had, it didn't happen like I thought it would.
Yeah, and I think we can remind her that I'm not going away. I know
Right.
maybe this feels like another loss to you because that is the reality. To them, it
Mhm.
feels like another loss. And I think we can remind them of that with our words. But what you're also saying, Sabrina, is with our actions. Once it
Right.
actually happens, that they see. And so I would encourage that this mother continue to have one on one time with her daughter, be very intentional with that. through the remarriage, after the remarriage, and let the daughter know that she's not going away. She's not going to lose that relationship, but it's very
Right.
common for this dynamic to happen.
That's
Yeah.
right. And we
Yeah.
can't force them through that door. I mean,
Right.
if she's going to turn away, she's going to
Hmm.
turn away. The only thing you can do is leave the door open
Mm.
and keep reminding her the door is open. I'm
Right.
ready to spend time with you. I'm like, and it's what's really hard on the mom is going to be handling the rejection over and over and over from her own daughter. And the temptation is to just quit, is just
Mhm.
to quit reaching out. I would say, don't quit reaching out.
Right.
Keep telling her the door is open on every chance you get, on just a random Saturday, a holiday,
Right.
whatever, just keep saying, I love you. Door's open. Can we get together soon? Let's get together soon. When can we
Right.
get together soon? So
Right. Yeah.
just keep reaching out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for joining us, Sabrina. This has been wonderful information for our viewers. Where can our viewers find you and your wonderful resources?
They can find me at sabrinamcdonald.com and
That's
get me
it.
there.
Okay,
Mhm.
perfect. And also, I might mention that for those who watch Ron Deal's podcast, Sabrina will be on a podcast with Ron the middle of June. So pay attention to that. You can hear more from Sabrina on that podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gayla. Appreciate it.
And to our viewers, before we sign off, I want to mention our upcoming Blended and Blessed event. It's an annual event specifically for blended family couples. It's a live stream and a live event, so you can watch it wherever you live, or you can host a group in your church or in your home. Watch the live stream wherever you can. The live event is in McKinney, Texas. So if you live in the DFW area or you're somewhere close, come join us. Ron Deal and myself will both be speaking at that event along with some other great speakers. Our theme this year is building unity in your step family. You can find all the information about that in the comments or go to blendedandblessed.com. Ladies, make plans to join us next month for our April live stream on April the 9th. We're going to be talking about how to navigate adult step families when the kids are adults from the very beginning. And I'm excited about our guest, Jan Matthews, who'll be joining us. So when Jan married her husband, Steve, he had 4 kids who were ages 19 to 27. She understands adult step families well, and she'll bring some valuable insight to that subject. So mark your calendars for April the 9th. Remember, you can always find us the second Tuesday of the month at 3 p.m. Central, or watch the recorded version later. So be sure that you're following Family Life Blended on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, and have your notifications turned on so you can get notified when we go live. If you had a question that we didn't have a chance to answer, we will come back and answer those. So look for those in the comments, even after our event is over today. God bless you, ladies. Thank you for joining us. Psalm 18:25 tells us, to those who are faithful, God shows himself faithful. That is a promise. So keep pressing on. I'll see you next time.